Dear friend, before we begin, I invite you to pause for a moment, not to think, but simply to notice that you are here. Perhaps your mind feels heavy with questions. Perhaps it keeps returning to the past, or racing toward the future. Perhaps you have tried to silence your thoughts, only to find them growing louder. This experience we now call overthinking often feels personal, as though something is wrong with us. Yet the truth is far more reassuring. This struggle is as old as the human mind itself. More than 2,500 years ago, the Buddha sat quietly and observed the same restlessness you may feel today. He did not condemn the mind for wandering, nor did he see it as an enemy to be defeated. Instead, he approached it with deep curiosity, compassion, and clarity. What he discovered was not merely a spiritual teaching, but a precise understanding of how suffering arises through thought. The Buddha saw that the mind does not suffer because it thinks, but because it clings, resists, and identifies with its own stories. Overthinking, in his view, was not a flaw of intelligence, but a misunderstanding of reality. In this reflection, we will explore how the Buddha explained overthinking long before modern psychology gave it a name. We will look gently at its roots, its patterns, and, most importantly, its release. You are not required to believe anything. You are only invited to listen, reflect, and observe your own experience with honesty. If you have ever longed for mental clarity, inner quiet, or freedom from endless inner dialogue, this ancient wisdom may speak directly to you. Let us now begin this exploration, calmly, patiently, and together. Overthinking as mental proliferation, papanka. Dear seeker, to understand overthinking from the Buddha's perspective, we must first learn how he described the restless movement of the mind. In early Buddhist teachings, overthinking is not referred to as anxiety or rumination. Instead, the Buddha used a precise and revealing term, papanka, which means mental proliferation. Papanka occurs when the mind takes a simple experience and multiplies it into complexity. A sound is heard, then judged. A thought arises, then analyzed, defended, and feared. A moment passes, yet the mind refuses to let it go. This teaching is clearly explained in the Madhyamika Sutta, where the Buddha traces suffering back to how perception turns into concepts, and concepts turn into stories about me and mine. What begins as a neutral experience quickly becomes, why did this happen to me? What does this say about who I am? What might happen next? This is not deliberate thinking. It is automatic expansion. The Buddha observed that papanka feeds on identity and comparison. The moment the mind divides experience into good or bad, success or failure, self or other, overthinking accelerates. Importantly, the Buddha did not suggest that we stop thinking altogether. He taught that suffering arises when thinking loses awareness and begins to multiply without restraint. Overthinking, then, is not wisdom, it is thought moving without mindfulness. When we see papanka clearly, something remarkable happens. The mind begins to slow, not by force, but by understanding. We recognize that much of our mental noise is not necessary, not true, and not helpful. And in that recognition, the first quiet space appears. In the next section, we will explore what fuels this proliferation, and why craving and resistance keep the mind endlessly active. Craving and aversion, the hidden fuel of overthinking. Dear seeker, once the Buddha explained how overthinking multiplies through mental proliferation, he turned to a deeper question: what gives this process its energy? His answer was both simple and profound. At the root of overthinking lie two powerful forces of the human mind: craving and aversion. In the early discourses, particularly within the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha repeatedly teaches that suffering arises not from experience itself, but from how the mind reacts to experience. Craving is the desire for things to be different than they are. Aversion is the urge to push away what feels uncomfortable. Together, they keep the mind in constant motion. When craving is present, the mind asks, how can I secure this? What if I lose it? How do I make this last? When aversion is present, the mind asks, "How do I escape this? Why is this happening to me? What if this never ends?" Overthinking is born in this tension between wanting and resisting. The Buddha observed that the mind uses thinking as a tool to gain control. Yet life does not respond to control in the way the mind hopes. And so thinking increases, looping again and again, searching for certainty where none can be found. Importantly, the Buddha did not judge craving or aversion. He recognized them as natural tendencies of an untrained mind. But he also taught that feeding them through constant thought only deepens restlessness. When craving and aversion are seen clearly, they begin to lose their grip. The mind no longer needs to rehearse the future or replay the past so intensely. In this way, understanding, not suppression, becomes the doorway to mental ease. In the next section, we will explore another subtle cause of overthinking, the belief that our thoughts define who we are. Identification with thought. This is me, dear seeker. As the Buddha looked more deeply into the restless mind, he uncovered a subtle but powerful misunderstanding, one that quietly sustains overthinking. This misunderstanding is identification. Overthinking does not arise simply because thoughts appear. Thoughts arise in every human mind. The difficulty begins when we unconsciously believe that our thoughts are who we are. The Buddha addressed this directly in the Anattalakkha Sutta, where he taught that thoughts, like sensations and emotions, are impermanent processes, not a self. Yet the untrained mind says, "This thought is mine. This worry defines me. This fear says something true about who I am." Once identification occurs, the mind feels responsible for every thought that appears. It tries to correct, justify, defend, or eliminate them. This effort gives rise to endless internal dialogue. The Buddha gently pointed out that thoughts arise due to conditions, past experiences, emotions, perceptions, not because a permanent self is producing them. Just as a sound arises and fades, a thought arises and passes away. Overthinking continues because the mind feels personally involved. When a thought is believed to be me, it becomes urgent. When it is seen as a mental event, it loses its authority. This insight is not meant to create detachment or indifference. Rather, it creates freedom. When you no longer carry every thought as an identity, the mind can rest. The Buddha taught that wisdom is not found by arguing with thoughts, but by seeing their nature clearly. When identification loosens, overthinking naturally subsides, not because thoughts disappear, but because they no longer demand obedience. In the next section, we will explore how forgetting the impermanent nature of life further intensifies mental restlessness. Forgetting impermanence, why the mind clings and repeats. Dear seeker, another quiet cause of overthinking lies not in what the mind does, but in what it forgets. The Buddha taught that all conditioned things are impermanent. This truth, known as anicca, is not a philosophical idea, but a lived reality observed moment by moment. This teaching appears throughout the Dhammapada, where the Buddha reminds us again and again that change is the nature of life. Yet overthinking thrives when the mind forgets this. The restless mind assumes permanence. This feeling will stay. This mistake will define my future. This situation must be fixed now. Because the mind believes the experience will last, it begins to panic. It repeats scenarios, searches for solutions, and replays memories, hoping to stabilize what is, by nature, unstable. The Buddha observed that clinging arises when impermanence is not fully understood. The mind grasps at pleasure, fearing its loss. It resists discomfort, fearing it will never end. Overthinking becomes an attempt to freeze life into certainty. But when impermanence is seen clearly, urgency softens. You realize that thoughts change, emotions move, circumstances evolve. Even the most persistent worry cannot remain the same. The Buddha did not ask seekers to believe in impermanence. He invited them to observe it directly. When this observation deepens, the mind relaxes its grip. There is less need to rehearse the future or relive the past. Understanding impermanence does not make life cold or detached. It makes it lighter. The mind learns that it does not need to solve everything immediately. In the next section, we will explore how training awareness, rather than controlling thought, brings the mind back into balance. The untamed mind and the practice of mindfulness. Dear seeker, after identifying the causes of overthinking, the Buddha turned his attention to a practical question: how do we work with the mind as it is? He did not suggest suppressing thoughts or forcing silence. Instead, he compared the untrained mind to something energetic but unsteady, like a wild horse or a restless monkey. In the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, the Buddha offers a simple yet transformative approach: mindfulness. Mindfulness is not about stopping thought. It is about knowing what is happening while it is happening. When mindfulness is absent, thoughts lead thoughts, and the mind runs without direction. This is when overthinking feels overwhelming, fast, loud, and exhausting. With mindfulness, something changes. A thought arises, and is noticed. A worry appears, and is observed. A memory surfaces, and is allowed to pass. The Buddha taught that awareness interrupts mental proliferation naturally. Not through effort, but through clarity. Importantly, mindfulness is gentle. It does not criticize the mind for wandering. It simply returns attention to the present moment, again and again, patiently. This repeated returning is not failure. It is the practice. Over time, the mind learns that it does not need to follow every thought. Some thoughts dissolve simply because they are not fed with attention. The Buddha described mindfulness as a refuge, a place where the mind can rest without struggling against itself. Through this practice, overthinking begins to lose its momentum. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer dominate the inner landscape. In the next and final section, we will explore how the Buddha's middle way brings balance, allowing thought to serve wisdom rather than fear. The middle way, when thought is guided by wisdom. Dear seeker, at this point, the Buddha offered a clarification that is essential to understand: freedom from overthinking does not mean the end of thinking. The Buddha never taught mental blankness or withdrawal from life. What he taught was the middle way, a path that avoids both indulgence in uncontrolled thought and harsh suppression of the mind. This principle is clearly articulated through the Noble Eightfold Path, which provides a practical framework for living with clarity and balance. Within this path, the mind is trained, not silenced. Right understanding allows us to see thoughts as processes, not commands. Right effort guides us to gently release unwholesome mental habits. Right mindfulness keeps awareness anchored in the present. Overthinking occurs when thought is driven by fear, craving, or resistance. The middle way restores balance by aligning thought with wisdom and compassion. In this state, thinking becomes purposeful rather than compulsive. The mind reflects when reflection is needed, and rests when rest is appropriate. The Buddha taught that peace does not come from eliminating thought, but from understanding its nature. When thought is no longer used to escape discomfort or secure identity, it naturally slows. This is not a sudden transformation. It is a gradual cultivation. With practice, the mind learns to trust awareness more than worry, and clarity more than control. As this understanding deepens, overthinking loses its grip, not through struggle, but through insight. With this, the Buddha's explanation comes full circle. Suffering ends not when the mind is forced into silence, but when it is guided by wisdom. And from here, we move gently toward closing, bringing these insights into daily life. Dear seeker, as we come to the end of this reflection, I invite you not to hold these teachings as ideas to memorize, but as gentle understandings to live with. The Buddha never described overthinking as a personal failure. He saw it as a habit of the untrained mind, formed through misunderstanding, reinforced through repetition, and sustained by fear and attachment. And because it is a habit, it can be softened with patience and care. When the mind becomes restless again, and it will, remember that awareness itself is already a step toward freedom. You do not need to argue with your thoughts, analyze them endlessly, or push them away. Simply seeing them clearly changes your relationship with them. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that peace is not something to be manufactured through effort or control. It emerges naturally when understanding replaces confusion, and when observation replaces resistance. Over time, as mindfulness deepens and identification loosens, the mind begins to trust stillness. Thought finds its proper place. Silence no longer feels empty, it feels supportive. If this reflection has offered you even a small sense of clarity, allow that to be enough for today. Insight does not demand immediacy. It unfolds gradually, in moments of honesty and attention. As you return to your daily life, carry this gentle reminder with you. You are not your thoughts, and you are not required to follow every one of them. Thank you for walking this path of inquiry. May your mind be patient, your awareness steady, and your heart at ease. Until we meet again, walk gently.